when we're constantly being conditioned to be addicted to instant gratification in essentially all the areas of our lives, it makes it that much harder to develop meaningful relationships.
But what seems to be the biggest challenge in dating today that people come to you for?
Because people buy into that illusion of options, I think there's less value placed on the relationships that they do have, or the potential relationships that are in front of them, because there is the thought of, if this person is not meeting my needs in the moment, they're disposable.
What is the biggest myth that you've had to kind of debunk in terms of the psychology field?
Maybe that person does show signs of narcissism, but that doesn't make them a narcissist. Or maybe that person shows signs or symptoms of depression. That doesn't mean that they're clinically depressed.
What has been something that you've been telling other people that you've also failed to give to yourself?
That's good. Wow.
Jean Messeroux,
Yes.
thank you for coming by the 1% podcast. Ironically, we met at Mo's event. And
shout out to Mo.
Yeah, shout out to Mo.
Yeah.
You went on her podcast, and then I went on her podcast after. Mm-hmm. And I think I was more drawn to you. First of all, you're very well spoken, and
thank you,
the self-awareness and self-exploration that you talk about really interests me. And I just told you a little bit off camera, but I think we're gonna have a really good conversation because I am very interested in psychology and how the brain works and how people work, and I'm interested in people.
Sure.
And that's the line of work that you are also in. Mm-hmm. And I guess my first question to you is, if you can describe what you do,
sure,
what would it be?
What I do currently.
Yes.
Yeah. So I am a licensed psychotherapist by the pathway of social work. I used to be a teacher. So I was a former high school teacher, did that for 7 years. Then I transitioned into social work. So I've been doing that. I'm in my 3rd year of doing psychotherapy. I still do it in the school system as well. So I work with high school students on the mental health side, counseling and, social work, psychotherapy. And then I also meet with clients one-on-one in private practice. And I'm also a creative entrepreneur. So I have the Human Gallery, which is like my multimedia production company, production specifically to filmmaking, photography, and fashion design. And then I also have created and direct Human Fathers, which is a platform that focuses on conversations around fatherhood and mental health, with a diverse group of fathers within my community and even strangers, fathers that I meet along the way and choose to interview. Mm-hmm. And I also, it's sometimes I have to remember because there's so many different avenues of work, but I also consult for education and healthcare organizations, basically supporting them in policies that are centered around wellness, mental health, social emotional learning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that sometimes this line of work, they choose people because either they love to help people, and they want to give back, or maybe sometimes their childhood wasn't always the best, and that's their way of giving it back as they get older.
Right.
So for you, what is that inspiration, that driving force to really help people?
That's a good question. I think it's a combination of reasons. So I can actually take it to the beginning of my career path. So within education, when I first decided to become a high school teacher, I was driven by, I had a passion for writing. And so I was an English teacher. When I was in college, I was trying to figure out what I could do with my passions. I was an English major. And so I wasn't too sure in the beginning. By my senior year, I got involved with mentorship and tutoring. And I really enjoyed that work. I enjoyed being in the school system and supporting the students I was working with. So that's what inspired me to become a high school teacher. And also, I guess the personal reason, or the personal purpose, was related to me not having mentors, or I'm not even going to say teachers. I think just figures that growing up that were positively influencing me. I didn't really have folks that I looked up to in my proximity. So I looked up to people I would see on TV, for example, athletes. I was a big Allen Iverson fan growing up. But I didn't have anyone, again, in my proximity, or anyone that I was seeing in my school or in my community that I wanted to emulate, or that I felt inspired by, or that I really learned from. or looked forward to learning from, rather, because you can learn from everyone. But yeah, there was no one that I really looked forward to learning from. There's no one that I looked forward to learning from, and so that really inspired me to become a teacher. As a teacher, the first the first the first year of teaching, they always say, is the hardest, and so that first year or two was challenging for me. Not so much the students, they come with their own challenges, but it was also just being in the education system and navigating bureaucracy and the politics and the lack of resources. The list goes on, right? So that, in addition to personal experiences I was having at the time, took a toll on my mental health. And that's what inspired me to, at the time, I wasn't really familiar with mental health or like resources related to mental health. I didn't know what that would look like for me as well, like looking for a therapist who looked like me and someone that I can connect to and relate to. And so I had a friend whose mom was a therapist, and she was like the first therapist that I connected with and like actually sought out. And I did my own research. There's a book called Standing in the Shadows, which is about depression and like the mental health industry in relation to Black men. And so I saw the book spoke to a lot of my experience. But it also kind of planted that light bulb to inspire me to consider a mental health career. And then while I was in education, I was always a teacher that students would share their experiences with. And being an English teacher, we often had like Socratic seminars and discussions. So a lot of topics related to social, emotional health came up. At the time, again, I wasn't too familiar with mental health, but I just knew that I had the capacity to hold space for people and to connect with people on a deeper level through conversation. And so these combined experiences inspired me to return to school and do the work that I'm doing today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's fascinating about that is that you have graduated from incredible institutions.
Thank you.
And I guess for me to understand, and I know this is this, I will never understand this about the demographic. And when I ask this, I'm asking this question out of like pure curiosity.
Sure.
I have a friend who, he was on the podcast, and he is Nigerian.
Yeah.
And he talked about that, you know, his mental health in the space of his ethnicity was never really accepted. And it was always kind of like the tough guy, where you needed to be this mentally strong figure. And
Right.
I guess for you, you said that you're Haitian as well.
Yes.
Was there a specific motivation for men of color that you wanted to kind of target and make sure that it's okay for them to express their feelings and express themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes. So the yes count sounds a little hesitant, right? And so why I say it like that is because I think I've gone through different transitions. And so originally that was the main focus. Again, inspired by the book that I read, my teaching experiences. I've taught in schools that are primarily Black and Latino, being in the Bronx and in Newark, New Jersey. So just the demographic that I work with and, you know, essentially surrounded by, I always saw myself working for folks who looked like me, and working with folks who looked like me. And again, just not judging, but being inspired by my experiences as well. Just knowing what it's like just as a Black man, right? As an Afro-Latino man, because my mother's side is from Costa Rica. So it's like I kind of have a dual experience, if you will. Being in the field now and expanding and having access to more communities through the work that I do on the mental health side and also on the creative side, and even just on the policy side and policy work that I do, it's broadened my horizons more. And I think that's also reflected in the work that I do as well outside of mental health. So like, for example, with Human Fathers, originally when I started the project, it was focusing on Black fathers, and specifically young Black fathers, who I saw in my community. These are people that I either knew personally or had like second hand relationships too, that, you know, our mutuals essentially connected us. And as I continue to expand and as I continue to see the need for these conversations in different spaces, that's also reflected in the work. So I have fathers who the project Human Fathers is still, if you check it out, it's primarily Black fathers. But I also have interviews with fathers of different ethnicities and backgrounds, because I think with mental health, the priority for me is obviously to connect and support my community, because there are so many discrepancies in the wellness space. I'm not even gonna say mental health specifically, but I just think healthcare and education collectively. There's so many deficits in resources, but I also see the value in expansion and in serving multiple populations as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, when people come to you, what is the major topic of conversation that they're coming to you for?
When people come to me, what is the major topic of conversation?
Like, what is the thing that they're struggling with the most?
Specifically in the mental health space?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Interestingly enough, and I say this because I have mixed feelings about it, because of the airwaves and how prevalent this topic is in the airwaves. Relationships, people, and I'm not specifically a relationship coach or therapist, right? But people often come to me with concerns related to relationships. Not so much couples therapy, but just folks who are mostly men who are navigating relationship challenges with their partner, and they need more insight on how to build healthier relationships. The comment I made about the airwaves, I know like in a lot of podcast spaces and media spaces, relationships seems to be like the number one topic I see coming up in most spaces. And so that's why I'm like, man, we're always talking about relationships, but it's real. People are going through it. I think because with relationships, it's there's so much ambiguity, and solutions are not linear. When someone comes to me with career challenges or concerns, or even like personal mental health challenges or concerns, I think the solutions can be more straightforward and sometimes linear, especially in the career space. With relationships, you know, you're involving two people, so sometimes more. So there's a lot of ambiguity and more challenges that come with that, because you're considering two or more whole comprehensive human beings.
Yeah. Now, this next question, it's honestly similar on the topic of relationships, but well, number one, before I get to that question, I think that relationships are so prevalent today because it's just this one thing that we're trying to figure out, right?
Yeah.
Like we're trying to find that life partner that we want to spend the time with. I think it's among the many things I think the reason why it's always a topic of conversation is because, number one, we talk about this thing called love, and sometimes we know what it is, sometimes we don't really think we know what it is.
Right.
I think we, a lot of talk about God and the spirituality and religion aspect. And I think number three is the thing that we always talk about is death, because those three things are like life's greatest questions or things that we're trying to figure out.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's so relatable. Everybody can either, number one, they've grieved a person that's not here anymore, a person that is still alive. And number two, they've either been in love or they've seen love or they just got out of love. And I think religion and spirituality is, we're always trying to figure out, well, what is this higher power that some people believe or they don't believe in? So I think that that's really why the conversation comes up a lot. And I guess in terms of my question, what do you think seems to be the biggest challenge in dating today, and specifically New York City? Just because I think there's so many people that live here, right? And if you just get out of a relationship, it's so easy to go walk down the street and you could see a woman, a beautiful woman at that.
For sure.
And I don't know if it's because of the lot of options that people can or cannot have. But what seems to be the biggest challenge in dating today that people come to you for?
The biggest challenge that people come to me for in relation to dating or relationships today, particularly in New York City, I don't know if I can speak to one overarching challenge. I think there are multiple challenges and obstacles usually at play. One being what you just named as well, the illusion of options. And I say illusion because there are options in terms of access. We do have more access to people, whether that's in person because it's New York City and they're just like you said, there's so many people, but also digital access, right? You can anyone you want to talk to is a DM away, essentially. I call it an illusion of options because that access in most cases is limited. That doesn't, because you can DM someone or because you can walk down the street and meet someone who's attractive, or you can go to a party or a club and connect with someone, doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a meaningful connection or relationship with that person. Or to your point about love and fulfillment, that you're going to get that from that person. In most cases, you're probably not. So I think that illusion of options gets in the way for a lot of folks navigating relationships. And it also, because people buy into that illusion of options, I think there's less value placed on the relationships that they do have, or the potential relationships that are in front of them, because there is the thought of, if this person is not meeting my needs in the moment, they're disposable. And so that comes up. Another challenge I would say is a lack of clarity around what people want. And so what comes with the illusion of options, when people are presented with too many options, it's hard to make a decision, right? It's hard to have clarity. It's like going into a restaurant that has a menu full of foods that you really enjoy. It's going to be hard to decide on that one or two meals that you want. So I think there's a lack of clarity around what people really want. I mean, if you ask a typical man, for example, he's going to say, okay, I want a woman who looks like X, Y, and Z and cooks for me, cleans, essentially. This is not everyone, but I'm just saying, just giving an example. But that's very vague, right? That doesn't guarantee that you're going to be happy in that connection, that you'll be fulfilled just because she's beautiful and cooks and cleans. Like, she'd be a terrible person, right? Like, it doesn't guarantee anything. So I think there's a lack of clarity, and that comes with self-awareness. I think that comes with folks really taking time to sit with themselves and ask the harder questions, and be more introspective. And what I find is that a lot of people are afraid to sit with themselves. People are afraid to sit in silence. People are afraid to ask the hard questions and face those questions. But we're also very distracted. So when you have your phone always accessible, and an unlimited supply of distractions at any moment of the day, it's very hard to ask those questions to yourself. It's also very hard to develop meaningful relationships when we're constantly distracted.
Yeah, that the reason why I was laughing at that food menu example is because when I go on Uber Eats or I go to an ice cream shop and they have so many flavors, I'm like, oh man, I don't even know which one to choose. And I guess it's also too, like, a thought that comes to mind is potentially lacking intention about what they are pursuing.
Right.
And I think I mean, I just turned 25 this year, and I know that the 20s are this thing where we're trying to go out, or we're trying to, some people are on the spectrum where they want to go out and they want to go have fun. And then some people are, I mean, I guess I put myself in this category where I'm focused on creating the life that I want to live in my 20s.
Right.
So by the 30s or maybe 40s, I can have those fruits of the labor. And I think at least my short time in living in New York City, I think that it's a lack of intention.
Yeah.
Well, what is my intention to go on this date with you, or what is my intention as we're spending time with one another?
Right.
I think that not. I think just both ways. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just men. I think it's also sometimes women lack intention, and I think as a
Mm-hmm.
whole spectrum, we this is I'm seeing you for however so long, and this is my intention is to date you or to pursue a relationship,
Right.
and I think that that's sometimes also too from my observation, is that there's a lack of intention there.
Yeah. I agree with that. I like the point that you made about essentially delaying your own gratification. And I think that also contributes to a lot of the problems that we're seeing today because we we have so much convenience, a surplus of convenience to the point of our detriment. Whether that's, as you mentioned, Uber Eats or Amazon, you got something delivered tomorrow, right? Or even today, depending on what time you order, right? It's like there's so many options for convenience. And when we're constantly being conditioned to, when we're constantly being conditioned to be addicted to instant gratification in essentially all the areas of our lives, it makes it that much harder to develop meaningful relationships. Because if you have someone, for example, if you have someone who you're really interested in, who you really like, but let's say there's an area of growth that they have and they're not improving or doing that thing that you need for them to do in the instant amount of time that you want it, then there's that transition to, okay, I can hop on Instagram and DM someone, or I can hop on Tinder or whatever the dating app is to connect with someone. Even when we consider folks seeking like attention seeking behavior. And so sometimes what I've discussed in conversations with clients as well is seeking attention when their partner is not giving them the attention, because it's like, okay, if I send this picture to my partner and they don't respond in the way that I, or the time frame that I might want, I can just post this online and get a bunch of likes and DMs and replies. So I think I say all that to say that I think that that's a valuable point that relates to the challenges that we see.
Do you believe that there's a lack of, I don't know if it's self love or self giving that love back to self?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, relationships are so complex, right? It's
Right.
not just this A and B thing. It's
Sure.
there's C, D, maybe E or F
Right.
thing that happens in relationships. Do you believe that the complexity of the relationships can cause someone that may not love themselves try to seek outside of the relationship just because, oh, this person's not giving me what I need?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe if you watered your own flower or
Mm-hmm.
you poured into your own cup, maybe the need of external validation
Yeah.
wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm. So just to make sure I'm
Mm-hmm.
responding to the correct question. So do I think that a lack of self-love causes people to look outside of their relationships for validation?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I believe there's truth to that. But I think whether a person seeks validation outside of their relationship, I believe can, depending on the context, self-love, I do believe is at the root of it. And I think there are other factors that may tie into that as well. But I do agree with the notion that, as cliche as it sounds, it does begin with self-love and accepting yourself and validating yourself. I don't think that self-love or developing self-love requires everyone to be alone until they somehow like master that and then jump into a relationship. I find that that's rhetoric I often hear, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't fully believe in that or subscribe to that, because everyone's journey is different. And I think while your self-love journey is important, you can also meet people along your path who you may have a great connection with and who may align with that journey and that self-love journey that you're on. But I think in terms of folks seeking validation outside the relationship, it's definitely connected to self-love and also one's values, which is a part of self-love essentially. I find that people who, I think values are arguably the most important element of a relationship, aligned values. Because that shows in every part of the relationship from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Or the discrepancies, if they're misaligned, that shows in different parts of the
well.
relationship. Yeah.
How much is trauma playing into all this? Like how much of our own inflicted wounds or wounds that we didn't really ask for are playing into our own versions of suffering?
Within a relationship or
just in self?
Mm.
Because I know you're not you said that the relationship, like people come to you for relationships, but in terms of like psychology and social work, how much of our own doings or traumas that we didn't really ask for are we causing our own suffering?
Trauma plays a major role. I mean, of course, you know, the trauma conversation in the mental health space is very popular, and it may sound cliche, but trauma does affect how we view ourselves, how we show up for ourselves and others, how we process that trauma, because everyone essentially experiences trauma at some point in their lives, whether it's in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and that trauma can there's a variety of ways to experience trauma. You have like physical trauma, emotional trauma. Sometimes you may have an experience that involves both. So not every trauma, I would say, affects how one navigates self-love or their relationships. I believe it's tied to the type of trauma that they experience. And obviously, depending on the impact, you know, it's going to affect more or less how you navigate.
Sure. As you done some work, done a good amount of work in the psychological realm. You talked about a little bit of there's a lot of psychological buzzwords nowadays.
Yeah, for sure.
And cliches of psychology. What is the biggest one that what is the biggest myth that you've had to kind of debunk in terms of the psychology field?
That's good. I have to take a minute to think about that. I think there's so many that there's so many concepts that get misconstrued. I don't know if there's one like larger dominant one that I can think of. I'll speak to diagnoses. That's what I think comes top of mind. We often see words like narcissist thrown around commonly, or bipolar, or ADHD, people being depressed, etc. The list goes on, right? And there's a difference between diagnoses. Actually, let me back that up. So our brains, labels make processing for our brains a lot easier. And so when we notice signs of said diagnoses, it makes it easier for us to slap a label on what we perceive so that we can dismiss it and move on to the next topic or the next experience that's calling for our attention. It becomes dangerous when we do that, because we're misdiagnosing people, whether formally or informally, usually informally, and labeling people based on personality traits or character traits that we notice that maybe that person does have does show signs of narcissism, but that doesn't make them a narcissist, right? Or maybe that person shows signs or symptoms of depression. That doesn't mean that they're clinically depressed. And I'm also careful to do that in practice as well. And even when I educate people on mental health, I emphasize that often, that there's a difference between someone showing signs and symptoms of a diagnosis and someone being clinically diagnosed as whatever mental health challenges associated with those symptoms. And it's important for folks to do their research. I'm not saying everyone needs to read the DSM and become a psychologist or a professional, but we do have to be careful with the names and the labels that we ascribe to people.
Yeah, those words are thrown around, ADHD. I mean, I don't even know if when I was younger, I was diagnosed with ADHD and ADD, but I don't know if I think there's so many, and I went to psychiatrist, so I don't know if the label is correct or not. I mean,
yeah,
I will say that there are many things that, like sometimes even like during a podcast, like I've noticed and I've had to become more self-aware is that sometimes my mind goes elsewhere.
Yeah.
So like trying to stay locked into the conversation sometimes has been difficult, and I've been better with that as more episodes have gone on. And then sometimes I do have signs of like depressive episodes.
Yeah.
And I think that's just normal within the human experience. And I think once we label it as such, like I try to be open to the people like, hey, you maybe haven't gotten out of bed all day or just whatever. Like, oh, maybe I'm just, just not feeling it, or down in the dumps.
Having a bad day.
Yeah. And I think that we label it so quickly because I don't know if it's our mind doesn't like ambiguity and doesn't like uncertainty. And we just like, oh, if we label it as this, then we just feel comfortable and we feel reassured within ourselves that this is what it is.
Agreed. And it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to take the time to process and really assess who someone is. It's taking it back to the topic of relationships. Again, this is why there's the illusion of access and of options, because there's so many things calling for our attention. In a relationship context, you may have all these potential options, but are you really taking the time to assess who you're dealing with? That takes work. It's easy to label someone. It's easy to, I mean, if we're going by like social media definitions or assumptions, everyone could be a narcissist, right? If you have social media, I mean, if you're posting yourself often by other folks, like perception, you could be a narcissist. Doesn't make you a narcissist. So I think there's definitely accuracy to that point.
And I mean, we all face narcissism, right? Like we all are somewhat of narcissists. Like there's a little bit of a hint of narcissism in there, for sure, in the human nature.
We're human. Yeah, we're human beings.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. I guess it is very interesting. Is I think as there are so many social media therapists and people that I don't want to say a degree is necessary to be in the field, but I do think it has a lot of credibility.
Well, it is if you want to practice.
Yeah, if you want to practice, for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just get the certifications and they believe that is the expertise of psychology or mental health. But I think it's somebody, at least for me, it's like you have to study and you have to continuously put yourself in the war zone of it. You can't just, I don't think that you can do a certain amount of hours, like 100 hours, and now you have a certificate. Like I think that there's got to be a little bit more expertise, at least in this field,
for sure.
That you have to go through.
For sure. Just to I don't want to cut your train of thought.
No, of course. No, go.
I just wanted to build on that topic as well because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
In the healthcare space, essentially, we're practitioners, right? So our career is ever evolving. Our practices are ever evolving. So similarly to an MD, right? A doctor, you essentially, if you're a doctor who went to school, so I used to work at Tufts Medical Center in Boston when I was in college. I used to work in the trauma unit, And so I worked with a lot of surgeons. I did anesthesia. I was a technician of anesthesia. So most of the doctors that I worked with were veteran doctors. These were guys who graduated like the 90s, 80s, some in the 70s. But they were constantly researching, constantly reading, looking up different drugs and innovations in their field, because that field is ever evolving. Healthcare is always evolving. There's always new innovations. There's always more to learn. And so even for folks who did get their degree related to mental health, that degree you got, even my degree that I got back in my social work degree, that was 2022. There have been innovations and growth, so much growth in the field since then. So I can't rely on, oh, I went to Columbia, so I know everything. No, there's a lot to still learn. And so I just want to emphasize that, because I think even if you do have the degree, you still have to continue learning, which is why for most mental health professions, it's a requirement in order to maintain your license. You have to do continuing education hours. And so it's important. Mm-hmm. It's definitely important to stay on top of your content knowledge in the field.
Now, one of the things that I know in today's day and age is loneliness seems to be a very big factor.
Loneliness epidemic, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You stole the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say loneliness epidemic, because that's what I feel like we are in. And I think social media has somewhat to do with that as well.
Large part of it.
How do we combat this? How do we combat this? How do we combat this loneliness epidemic that we want to be more connected, but our phones are literally making it so hard for us to connect with one another? How can we battle this?
I like this topic because it's very relevant to so many aspects of life, whether in work, friendships, romantic relationships, and even our own self-development. And in the conversations that I've heard and that I've read around the loneliness epidemic, social media is often framed as a major catalyst for it and a stimulant of the loneliness epidemic. I think there's truth to that, and accuracy to it, but social media is essentially a tool. So it more so depends on how we use it. And it's kind of like a knife, right? Like you can use a knife to cut up the food you're eating, or you can use a knife to hurt someone or yourself. It just depends on, the knife itself is a tool. It's not negative in its nature. How you choose to use it determines its purpose and its function. Obviously, social media is the corporations behind social media, the corporations that pull the strings for social media, obviously capitalize off of our attention and how we engage with it. But we, again, still have the power as consumers to choose how we want to use it. And to answer your question, I think it really comes down to using it as a tool to foster relationships in real time and in real life. Most people use social media as consumers. We watch content, we buy products off of it. But I think if we shift from a consumer mindset to a producer mindset, and what I mean by that is using social media more actively to cultivate those relationships online, but also in real life. How like we met in real life, further connected online, and now we're here for this conversation. And I think, again, we in this example, we used it as a tool to connect. And I think it could be helpful in that context. There are, outside of social media, there are more factors that have contributed to the loneliness epidemic. I consider the economy, because everyone I know has like multiple jobs or hustles or businesses just to keep up with their lifestyles and just to basically survive. I think there's also a transition for folks who become parents, folks who are in relationships, right? There's just more to juggle. as we age. Um, the loneliness epidemic is more of a topic of conversation now, but even generations before us, especially for men, have um, struggled with loneliness as well. And again, I think it's connected to the demands of work, the demands of family, the demands of self, and also finding purposeful ways to connect with each other. So when we're children, adolescents, teenagers, college students, the benefit of being in school is that you're surrounded by community. You have all your friends are around you. So you don't really have to do any work to develop relationships, because by default, you know that I'm going to see my homie in my lunch period, or I'm going to see him in math class, or if we're on a college campus, like we're going to hang out this weekend because we're here. I know it's like after the school stages, it takes work. You have to put it in your calendar. You have to be more intentional, more organized around developing those relationships. And it's very hard to do when you have the demands of work, the demands of family, all these different parts of your life that require so much of you, so much of us. And so there are multiple factors that contribute to the loneliness epidemic. We consider the pandemic as well, and just how that the lasting effects that period of time has had on us, and how that's influenced our generation and the generations that come after us, and how we missed out on so much connection during that time too. So there are a lot of factors. I think in order to combat this epidemic, or in order to develop more connection, I think we can not only use social media, but also creating purposeful ways for us to connect with our communities. Mm-hmm. It could be having events. It could be attending other folks' events. Back to the conversation around values. If we can identify individually and collectively what we value, and create opportunities to connect with each other based on what we value, I think that can strengthen community, because people connect off of what they value. And so even when, let's say I think of, this is just an example, I think of like club and bar culture, and how folks may go to a club or a bar essentially to connect with people. It's very hard to do when the music is so loud and everyone's drunk or high. And, so the potential for a deep connection is very low in that setting. Not saying it can't happen, but it's hard to do in that moment, in that setting. But if we can identify purposeful ways to connect, and settings that we can connect with people in meaningful ways, I think that can help solve some of the loneliness issues that we're seeing.
Yeah, when you were talking about one school and stuff like that, I just, as I told you, I just recently graduated, and I think,
congratulations.
Thank you. I think I didn't realize the adverse effects of what school brought and the community that it brought until I'm out. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the thing what you just said, and you literally said it perfectly, is that when you go to school, I know that I was going to see, my coworkers, where I was working. And now out of it, I think I've been more I don't want to label it as loneliness, but it has been this feeling of emptiness, because there is no more community there.
Right.
And as I'm trying to navigate, a full-time job, I have seen myself like isolated more. Yeah. And a lot of my good friends don't live in New York City. I mean, I have friends here in Brooklyn, but they got stuff going on. They got, they have things to do and jobs and stuff like that. So for the bid for emotional connection has been, I don't know, I guess it's kind of low in a sense, just because I haven't been able to see other people. Mm-hmm. And for myself, it's trying to now navigate this different time. Yeah. And not only the bid for connection, but also just the disciplinary actions of it, where you know that you're going to this time, you're going to be here, you're going to be there, and now it's like your days are kind of open. Yeah. And there's adventure to that, but then there's also this deep void where you don't have time slots where you used to, and now you can't go see people. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to put it, because that's exactly how I've been feeling
Yeah.
as of late. And I know probably so many people that have either graduated
Mm-hmm.
or are going to graduate will probably feel.
I appreciate you sharing that too. I appreciate the transparency in that. And it brings me back to when I graduated undergrad and I moved. So I went to undergrad in Massachusetts, University of Massachusetts. And maybe a month after that was when I moved to New Jersey to teach. And I just turned 22 at the time, and I didn't know anybody in New Jersey, like no one. And so similarly, I went through that. I went through like I want to say like a 2 month depressive phase where exactly what you're saying. I felt loneliness. I felt a void. I was like, I'm going to work. I like the work that I do is okay, but it's stressful, right? And I don't really have anything outside of that. I don't know where to go. Like where the functions are. I don't know anybody. Um, what helped me at the time was I was fortunate. I was fortunate enough to have uh, some coworkers who were like within my age group, and we were able to connect and develop friendships over time. And I'm actually still friends with them like currently. So I was very fortunate because not everyone has that at their jobs. But also back to the point about spending time purposefully. So one of the words you said that I mentally took a note of was when you have those open time slots, there's an opportunity for adventure. And when I was in that phase, I took advantage of that opportunity a lot. So I would literally get on the train and come to New York, and without really knowing how I'm gonna spend my time, like I'm just gonna walk around. I'm gonna stop at maybe like a restaurant or so. I'm gonna take pictures. At the time, I was taking pictures on my phone, and that's actually what got me into photography. And kind of the rest was history when it comes to getting into the creative space. Because as I leaned into photography, then I got connected with more creatives and started shooting events and developed my network that way. But I think it started with leaning into the opportunity for adventure and spending that time purposefully. And yeah, I think there's one thing I realize is as we get older, it's challenging, but it's also beautiful. We're charged with more responsibility for every aspect of our lives. And so whether that's financial, whether it's related to time, whether it's related to our relationships, like everything depends on us. When you're in school and when you're growing up, your life is kind of decided for you to an extent. Like you said, they decide how you're going to spend your day. So you're going to be in school from 8 to 2 or 8 to 3, right? And then you may have an after school program, or you may play a sport, or your parents may decide what you're going to do for the rest of your time. But the further you get into adulthood, every minute of your day is decided by you. And again, it's challenging because it's a lot of responsibility, and it's hard to own every minute, especially when we're constantly distracted. But I think the more intentional we are about how we own our time, the more fruitful our relationships and our work and essentially our lives will be.
I do agree on that aspect. But then there's a demographic of people like myself that is trying to achieve great things. So when
Mm-hmm.
the off chance of us having leisure time,
Mm-hmm.
it's either number one, it's put into something like this, for example.
Yeah.
It's put into trying to grow something, trying to create a business, podcast, social media.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many aspects of the entrepreneurial spirit that other people might face, like myself,
Yeah.
where we do have free time, but the free time that we have is either number one, just spent in our own solitude, or
Mm-hmm.
two, it's spent in creation or towards something.
Yeah.
And I guess I guess this would be more of like a personal question, and I would like, your perspective and advice on,
Sure.
is that for somebody like myself that's so driven in this way,
Mm-hmm.
how do I create those bids for connection if I'm trying to, I always say I'm trying to create one of the biggest podcasts in the world, and
Yeah.
I know with that comes a lot of sacrifice.
Right.
And there's been a lot of times like I've missed family events.
Mm-hmm.
I barely see, my family now, and it's because I'm trying to create this thing.
Yeah.
And when I don't do it, I feel like I should be doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the time for solitude,
Mm-hmm.
or the time for hard work, is like, you're not doing this thing, but you probably should be doing this thing. So
Right.
I never really get to rest because my mind is always going after it.
Mm-hmm.
And in my attempt to try to create friendship or connection, it's been very iffy on the reciprocation of that.
Right.
So it just reconfirms my biases of, oh, nobody wants to spend time with me, so I'd
Mm-hmm.
rather just go do this.
Right.
As somebody who, it can be very extroverted but also very distant, and I think more often than it's very distant, how can we create those bids for connection in
Mm-hmm.
this difficult time where we don't essentially, what my question is that we have these confirmation biases that
Yeah.
if we try to bid for a connection and we don't get it, then we're like, all right, we're just going to keep putting our time in this thing that we're creating.
Sure.
But also in that, we know deep down that we're very voided and very isolated
Mm-hmm.
towards this one thing. So my question to you is, how can I create a better relationship with that while also disregarding this confirmation bias that, what, you can create connection, or you can have friends?
Right. That's a good question. And I like this question because the cliche answer would be to have a balance,
Yeah.
right? Learn how to balance it. And I don't think that's helpful. And firstly, I commend you for your pursuit, for wanting to and working towards building the greatest podcast in the world, right? I think there's power in being able to identify that and to be confident in that enough to actively work towards it. On the topic of purpose, I think relationships should tie into that. And not so much that you should only hang out with your friends if they're contributing to your purpose or the work that you're doing, but I do think that the connections benefit when they're built intentionally. And so there's a difference between, not saying you're doing this, but just an example. There's a difference between hitting up a friend to say, hey, let's go get some drinks and watch the game. And, hey, I know you're working on this thing and I'm working on this thing. We're both working. Let's come together to work together, even if what we're working on may not be the same project or may not be aligned in the same ways, but let's spend some time working on this thing. Or, for example, you value fitness. So that could be like, hey, I'm going on this run, or I'm going to go work out, pull up. So I think there's ways that you can still do what you feel is important to your mission and to your purpose, and bring your friends along with you. Again, that doesn't have to be every connection. I'm not saying that every connection has to be like this serious, like work-based time spent, but in my experience, I found that has been helpful. To your point about reciprocity, I think that's important to consider just for your own energy levels, and even the topic of self-love. I think it's important to build with people who reciprocate. And that's not to say that relationships should be transactional, because everyone has a different capacity depending on what they're experiencing or dealing with in the moment. So you may have friends who could be going through silent battles that maybe prevent them from showing up at certain times. Doesn't mean they're a bad friend. But I think if there's a consistent lack of reciprocity or interest or even communication around bandwidth and limitations, it's important to consider. And to consider in the context of if that's a friendship that you want to keep pouring into. And so I also view friendships in tiers. So I have friends that I know that these are like my closest friends. These are people that if I'm in a situation that I need support in, I can call them and they'll be there for me. I have friends that I know I'm not able to rely on in that way, but I still value their friendship. So they may not be the first person that comes to mind if I have an emergency, but there are people that I know that we can go to an event together, or we can get on a phone call every few weeks or every month or so. There's friends or associates that I know that we can connect in relation to work or topics that are more surface level. Doesn't mean that they're less valuable to me, but it's just different tiers of friendships. And how I personally determine those tiers is based on, again, purpose, and the context of those friendships too. Because some friendships you may not need to nurture as much, but the connection can still be strong. Like my son's godfather, we don't see each other often because we both work a lot, and his work requires him to travel a lot. So I see him maybe quarterly, if that. But we still communicate. Again, considering social media and phones as tools, we still send each other funny memes, or we're still able to connect digitally. So we may not be on the phone or FaceTime or hanging out much, but the connection is still maintained. We both do completely different lines of work. He works for the NFL. So these are very different lines of work. So there's not much opportunity for us to align in like a quote unquote purpose sense. But the relationship still has a lot of value, and that purpose in that relationship is the connection. It is the laughs. It is the transparency. And so I think going back to the concept of tiers and how we want our friendships or relationships, how we want how we want the dynamics of our friendships and relationships to operate, I think can determine the level of fulfillment that we get from them, if that's helpful.
Yeah. No, it is helpful, because I do have friends that most of my friends, either number one, I try to call them every week, or I do have people that love me and care for me, but the communication sometimes. I mean, there's one of my best friends. He lives in North Carolina, so him and I are usually on the phone. Like, he's like one of my daily check-ins.
Gotcha.
Right. We'll talk to one another, and most of them I usually communicate through video games. But I know that that's very, I guess, like this, I do want to spend time with them on this platform of like video games, but then there's that little voice. It's like, you probably should be doing something and you're not using your time wisely. So it's like this self-critical, like, oh, you're spending time, but then you're also not being productive towards the things that you did. Like yesterday, I spent time with one of my best friends for like 2 hours, and we just played video games. But then there's that thing where it's like, I also had to prepare for this podcast, and I also had to do other things. And sometimes those bids for connection also, like, sometimes it'll be at night, because sometimes that's when we're both free. So
sure,
whenever I do it, it's like sometimes like 9-10 o'clock. So then my also sleep schedule. So it's this very hard thing where it's like, I want these bids for connection, but then I also feel so critical about myself because I'm indulging in this. And it's like, you probably should be sleeping. You probably should be reading a book, or you probably should be getting to bed.
Man, that's interesting. You see, I sat up for this one, man. That's interesting, bro. So,
and I want more bids for connection with people in person. So I did like what you said. Hey, let's go get a workout. But then, like this thing, it's this very weird thing that I try to create this, but it doesn't get reciprocated. And then there's
Right.
this
Okay.
self-depreciating thing. Well, you're not good enough. Nobody wants to spend time with you. Like all of these things. But when people sit down with me, I don't know, sometimes they're like, oh, like you're very easy to talk to or
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
easy to hang out with. But then it's like this weird thing, this weird voice that I have. And I know
Right.
like if I'm voicing about this, I know probably somebody that's on the other side is probably going through the same thing.
For sure. Man, that's it's a very this is the topic that I'm actually very passionate about. Um so as you saying these things, my mind is, kind of like going in a lot of different directions. Um I think firstly I would question, and it's not necessarily, I mean, I know this is a podcast, but it's not necessarily to put you on the spot, but I think it's just a valuable question to think about,
Mm-hmm.
is the why. So the why behind how I'm receiving what you're saying is
Mm-hmm.
that your value, how you see your value seems to be tied to your output, whether that's the work that you're doing or the relationships that you're cultivating. And well, correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how I'm receiving it, but
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong.
Is it the output? That's a good question. And by output, do you mean creating on social media or the podcast? Or when you mean output, what does that exactly mean?
Output meaning the effort and the work that you're doing
Mm-hmm.
and the results that you're seeing or lack thereof.
I think sometimes, I actually thought about this the other day where
Mm.
sometimes sometimes I align my worth, or I think in this space it's very hard to not align it to your worth,
Mm.
because when you're putting out episodes and it's not getting the reception that you hoped for,
Yeah.
in some ways you need the validation or you need the acceptance of other people to watch what you're doing. There's no like
Mm.
physical product like, hey, I'm selling this, and there's no physical copy. So it's like it's based off of people watching, and
Right.
it's based off of creating a better episode than the previous one.
For sure.
So in some ways, do I believe that? Yes. And I think that also ties to not only other people, but potentially my family or my family, because I'm telling them I want to be a full-time podcaster and they kind of look at me sideways sometimes. I mean, some of them, like my mom and I feel like my dad, sometimes believe that I could do it.
Yeah.
But I think there's no money or monetary value here yet.
Right.
So part of that is on the perception of how much views is it getting? How many plays is it getting? Is people watching the clips? Are people doing this? Are they
Right.
subscribing? Are they following? So I think yes, to answer that question, I do believe yes, based on the fact of that in order for it to grow, it needs to be seen. And if it's not seen, then I have to either have better conversations and create better conversations, or I have to pour more into it.
Right.
So I think, yes, to answer that question, I do believe that some of my value is based off of external.
Got it. Now, I appreciate that, the transparency in that as well. And I think that's true for most, if not all, people on some level.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're social beings by nature. So we're going to receive and at times seek value from external sources. That comes with being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Even animals do the same, and depending on the animal, the species in their community. So I don't think that's inherently wrong or a negative thing. I look at it more objectively. I think that it can become unhealthy when we tie our worth to the external validation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would frame it, what would be the best way to frame it? I guess we can use the same example.
Mm-hmm.
So in the work that we do, we all have, especially as entrepreneurs, we all have goals in the work that we do. And I think that there's, in your case, tracking the external responses to your work, that can be like the metrics, the views, the engagement, the monetary rewards that come from it. That can be viewed objectively or subjectively. Subjectively, that can be tied to your own sense of validation, your own sense of worth as a person. Objectively, that can be tied to, this is my podcast, this is the work that I do. If it's not seeing the numbers that I wanted to see, how can we develop better strategy or more effective strategies to achieve those results? But at the end of the day, this work is not reflective of me in any way, shape, or form. With ambition, being an ambitious person, what's the best way to frame this? With ambition, it's easy to tie our goals and our output to our sense of worth, because you're ambitious, right? Like, these things are the things that we work on, and our output are almost like extensions of ourselves, especially as creatives. But I think it's important for us to distinguish our work as just that. It reminds me of entrepreneurs who sell their businesses, and folks will be disappointed in them selling their businesses. And we have to remember that these are just businesses. So if you created Apple and you decide to sell it for X amount of billions of dollars, that was an idea that you developed to a certain level of value, and you sold it. Steve Jobs is a creator of Apple. He's not Apple. His mind, his IP, who he is as a person, his character, that's a completely different, separate value aside from Apple. So Tim Cook can run Apple, and he's still Tim Cook outside of Apple. Apple itself is its own entity, and the work that we do is, these are entities that we create, but they're not us. And I think when we can frame it or remind ourselves, we have to remind ourselves of these things, because we often get consumed in our work. I think that can create healthier relationships between ourselves and our work, ourselves and other people, and just ourselves and how we view ourselves. And I think the more, again, it's cliche, but the more that we can create balance, or the more that we can, let me scratch the word balance, the more that we can cultivate the other areas of our lives and allow ourselves to accept the ebbs and flows, I think I believe we'll have healthier dynamics with our work. I lost my train of thought for 1 second. Even to the point of feeling guilt around, let's say, not working when you feel like you should be working, or not matching whatever level of output you think you should be matching. I think it's important to ask why. So when that thought comes up of, I should be working on this, why? What is, again, back to purpose. What is the purpose in this moment? What is my quota? What is my mission? So like, when I experience those, and I'm saying this because this is an experience that I've had myself. So when I get in these moments, I ask myself those questions. So if I feel, if I'm in a space where I feel like, man, I should be working, I ask myself, why? What should I be working on? What are my goals for the week? What are my goals for today? Is there something that I am behind on, or is this just that voice that's saying you should be applying yourself?
Very good insight on myself. Very good insight. Thank you for that.
Anytime.
What has been, when I think of also psychologists, I also think of people help others but fail to help themselves. What has been something that you've been struggling with to give to yourself that you've been helping other people with?
Mm.
Like, what is something that, to better articulate my question, what has been something that you've been telling other people that you've also failed to give to yourself,
Mm.
or still
Dang,
in
that's
the
good, man.
progress?
Yeah, that's good. Wow. Um, hmm. It's interesting because I think this topic is coming up for me in different spaces. So yesterday I was at the wellness takeover event. Shout out to Gerard too. Jared, excuse me. He did an amazing job. Him and his team putting together that event, and there was we spoke about this leading up to this conversation, but there was like a wellness portion where they had like massages and there was like a chakra balancing activation that they had. And so the woman who was, I forget her name, but the woman who was facilitating that activation, she told me that that's something I have to work on, is not pouring from an empty cup. And she said that I extend myself often for others, but I need to direct more energy towards myself. And I agree to an extent. I don't think that I pour from an empty cup per se. My cup doesn't feel empty. I actually feel, I feel, if I'm using the cup analogy, probably like 85, 90%. Like I feel good. I feel able to pour, at least on like a mental or energetic level. But something that I suggest to my clients that is also an area of growth for me. That's the question. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one that it's taken some thought for me. Mm. Trusting my direction more. I as I mentioned before, I work with clients who navigate different aspects of life, whether it's career, relationships, obviously their personal lives, and I encourage clients to trust their direction, trust their intuition, trust their first mind, trust their journey, essentially, as cliche as it sounds. But that's an area of growth that I also have. For the most part, I do trust the direction that I'm going in, and I'm aware of the value of the work that I do and the purposes behind it, and the value of who I am as a person, just in character and how I show up and what I'm able to contribute in different spaces. But doubt is always in the background. And it's not so much a doubt of myself, but on the entrepreneurial path, really any path, there's always ambiguity. Ambiguity doesn't always have to come with doubt, though. I think it's possible, not even possible. I think ideally the healthier way to face ambiguity is to face it with unshakable confidence and courage. And that's ideal, but that's not always the case all the time. And so I find myself in times of uncertainty or in times of ambiguity, sometimes there is the whisper of doubt. And as someone who I'm not a religious person, and yeah, I don't consider myself pious by any means, but I do value having a relationship with God. And sometimes there is that even questioning of God, like, are we good? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, are we, you still got me? You didn't forget about me, right? So like, there's that aspect that comes in at times, especially in taking L's. I remember there was a year that I just took L after L, bro. It was like, oof, even thinking about it it kind of brings me back, and I'm like, damn, I took so many losses in different areas of my life, um, and it was, I was going through a depression as well because of it, and it was very hard for me to, like, I think that's where I had the most doubt because it just seemed like nothing was working out for me in the way that I wanted it to. But it didn't mean that it wasn't working out. It actually was working out for me. But at the time when I was in the trenches of it, I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so that doubt, those doubt whispers were screams at the time. And I was fortunate enough to see the other side of it, because transparently speaking, I was in a space where, I was considering checking out. You know what I'm saying? I was considering like, all right, this life thing ain't it, man. Like, let me get to whatever other realm I need to get to. You know, so that also taught me to, again, as cliche as it sounds, to trust the process and to know that those L's and those no's and those times of uncertainty, they all tie into the greater purpose. Um, and it's okay to not have the answers. And something that might be on a tangent right now, but it just came to mind. My favorite part of nature is the ocean. And I think what's so beautiful about it is the uncertainty. Nobody's been to the bottom of the ocean. We don't really know what's down there. Like, we know to an extent, to a certain amount of like feet or yards or kilometers, however they measure it. But nobody really knows what's at the bottom. And even looking at like biblical texts, there's always kind of noted that the waters, the ocean was here before everything. Majority of our planet is water. Majority of us as human beings are water. And so there's a lot of mystery around it, but it doesn't make it any less beautiful or any less nurturing or powerful. And I think that I liken that to life and the mysteries and the ambiguities that come with it. Sure, there's danger. There's the potential of being hurt. There's the reality that we will be hurt at some point, at multiple points, but that doesn't make life any less beautiful or powerful or purposeful.
What allowed you to check back in? What was it? A person? Was it a thought? Was
Mm.
it something? What allowed you to check back in to save yourself from what it seems rock bottom?
Excuse me. Um, what allowed me to check back in from the space that I was in, the depressive space that I was in, was truthfully having a child. Uh, Having a child, having a son, made checking out not an option. So it was kind of just like a switch. Like, fuck how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the sense of dismissing how I feel. It didn't take away from the importance of how I felt or my value of my value as a person and the importance of like my needs and emotions. But it just made quitting not an option. Like, it's kind of like night and day, cold turkey. Like, whatever you're going through, whatever you feel, you're gonna have to feel it and you're gonna have to process it. You're still gonna have to show up because you have a responsibility that is greater than you. And if you check out, now you're basically transferring that pain to him at a higher level. So with that understanding and with that intuitive like disposition, it forced me to view my experiences differently, and it just forced me to take the necessary actions to get out of that hole and to get away or ascend essentially from rock bottom.
Would you say in some way your son saved your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say that, I wouldn't say I say it all the time, but I say that to my loved ones for sure. I was someone who, he saved my life in many ways, but I used to experience seasonal depression since a child. Like I grew up in Massachusetts, so it was very cold, and the winters are like darker there. I remember I'd get up to go to work and it'd be like pitch black, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. So that was consistent for me. Like I was used to it. Like I knew once we get to like November, from November to about April, I'm gonna be sad most of the time. Internally, I didn't show up like that. I sometimes I did, depending on the context, but for the most part, I've always been able to put the mask on and keep a straight face and, do the work that I needed to do, show up for people in the capacity that I needed to. But internally, that was something that I would deal with. And while I was by myself, in moments where I was alone, that's something that I would navigate. I haven't experienced that since having a child, like at all. And I realized that the first winter after having my son, it might have been like, I want to say maybe March. And I was sitting on my couch and it kind of just hit me. I'm like, yo, I haven't been depressed. And I remember the last time I was depressed. And I was like, what is causing that? And definitely there's so many beautiful aspects to fatherhood, but I think one of the most simple but fulfilling experience is coming home and having this baby who's excited to see you. They don't know, they just know you as dad, or I mean, he wasn't even putting words together at the time, but he just knows me as his father, essentially. He doesn't know what I'm going through. He's not, to the conversation about value or worth, right? He's not measuring my worth based on how much money I make or whether I worked out today or not or any of that. He's measuring my worth based on my presence. And to come home to someone who's ecstatic to see you, like I'll be putting my keys in the door and I would hear him, like his footsteps running up, and it's not even to sound sentimental, it's just the real, like, to get that hug upon first entering. It just makes you appreciate, it made me appreciate life differently, and it shifted what I value. And before I had a son, I prayed, one of my prayers was to be more grounded, because I was in a space where I was doing well, I was comfortable, but I didn't feel grounded. I felt kind of empty. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong happening in my life, but I just knew that I didn't really have much of an anchor. And having a child is probably the most grounding experience that a person could have. And so I believe that prayer was answered. And with it came a lot of healing as well.
I know your son is still very young.
Mm-hmm.
But as this is recorded,
Yeah.
and in hopes of maybe you showing him this someday,
Mm.
what is something you'd want to tell your child?
Mm. Mm.
Could be how much they mean to you, or a message that you've always wanted to say. Obviously, it can't be really comprehended right now, but if you had to show him a clip
Mm.
of this exact moment, what would it be?
A few things come to mind. One being that I love him, which is the obvious, I feel. But it's real. And that love is, it's different, for lack of a better term. It's a love that it surpasses, it's a comprehensive love. It's a holistic love. It's deeper than the love you have for a friend or the love you have for a partner. It's a love that is not tied to worth in any capacity, or um, it's unconditional, right? I would also tell him to I would also tell him that he has everything that he needs within himself. So we were talking about external validation earlier. He doesn't I would tell him that he doesn't need validation from other people or the metrics excuse me. He doesn't need validation from other people or the metrics of success that are projected onto us. I would tell him to have his own mind and not be critical of the information that he receives and the influences that he's presented with, and to assess that information and those influences and be brave enough to formulate his own thoughts and decisions. I would tell him to be a decision maker, because leaders are decision makers. Leadership starts with decision making. And even if that decision doesn't turn out to be the right one, there are lessons in the failures and the losses, and there's growth in there's strength and there's power in having the courage to make decisions, even in times of ambiguity. And I would tell him that everything that I've been doing since he's been born has been for him, and not so much in the aspect of financial benefit. That's part of it, but that's not the brunt of it. It's to create and leave him with the best example possible. None of us know when our last day is. So I can't, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be there for him. But I can't promise that I'm going to be there for him for the rest of his life, because we just don't know. But I'm intentional about leaving a trail, not necessarily for him to follow in terms of being or doing the things that I'm doing, but for him to be inspired by, for him to learn from, and for that to inform how he navigates his life on a professional level and also on a personal level. And everything I'm documenting, whether it's digital or personal, is for him to learn from, and for that to inform the man he chooses to become. And I don't know the man he'll choose to become, but I'm confident that it will be a man that I'm proud of, whether I'm fortunate to live to see it or not. And love and respect your moms. She's a great mother. Always, always, always treat her with the utmost respect, even in times of disagreement or conflict. She truly has his best interests at heart. A mother's love and willingness to sacrifice is beyond comprehension. And it's important. That respect and that appreciation is important. Without it, I don't think without it, I don't think we can be the best men we're created to be. It's a lot I could tell him, but I think those are the main things that come to mind.
There's a couple ways where I want to go with this.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a lot of. I was watching a Cat Williams podcast with I think it was Theo Vaughn, but he basically talked about how fatherhood has transformed his life, and in some ways, in some respects, I believe it has transformed yours as well.
Absolutely.
What's been the number one fundamental lesson that you've learned since having a child?
Number one fundamental lesson since having a child. The number one fundamental lesson that I've learned since having a child is the value of time in different capacities. So one capacity is being more aware of mortality, my mortality, his mortality, mortality of people, human beings. I think mortality is something that we're all aware of on some level, but we often ignore it or we try to avoid it because it's uncomfortable to face. And there's so much ambiguity tied to mortality. But having a child, witnessing my son being born and being through that whole process made me more aware of the cycle of life. And while birth is a beautiful experience to observe, it also makes you aware of beginning and end. And so with that awareness comes more intentionality with how I live. And so, as I spoke to earlier, before having a child, I was in a comfortable space, but an empty space. And that was reflected in how I would use my time, how I would approach opportunities and resources, how purposeful I was spending my time, and how purposeful I was showing up, and how intentionally I was showing up. With fatherhood and a more developed consciousness of time, I'm more intentional about all of those elements, how I show up, how I spend my time, how I approach resources and opportunities. Even this, being here, this is essentially time away from my family. So, but it's time I appreciate because it's well spent. It's purposeful. If this was a few years ago, I wouldn't have had that consciousness at all, because I have an abundance of time. I can do what I want. At least I thought I can do what I want, spend money how I want, because it only affects me at the end of the day. So more intentionality and more purpose. But I also see the areas of growth as well in relation to that, because as we spoke about earlier, as we develop in adulthood, we become more responsible for how we spend our time. Parenthood accelerates that exponentially. And so there are also areas of growth in the gaps for how time is spent or how time is allocated or planned. So being very strategic and intentional down to like the hour and the minute of how I spend my time, excuse me, is an area of growth for me.
As I see the human on your shirt,
Yep.
what does being human mean to you?
Being human, so the Human Gallery is my brand when it comes to production and clothing. It's more of a reminder because there's so many elements around us that distract us from being human, whether it's work, whether it's social media, TV, music. There's so many stimulants that we have that take away from our humanness, if you will. And I think in its essence is being present, being beings, right? The element of just being. So even in this conversation, at least in the earlier part, we spoke a lot within the context of doing, whether it's work, relationships, and how we show up, what we're building. But it's a reminder to be. We're human beings, not human doings. And so human is really just that. It's a reminder to be present. It's a reminder to be. And it's embracing all aspects of ourselves. We're conditioned to view ourselves, like we talked about earlier, labels. We're conditioned to view ourselves in these boxes. I do this thing. I am an entrepreneur. I'm an employee. I'm a dad. I'm a partner. I'm this, I'm that. There's so many labels and boxes that we place ourselves in or that we're placed in. But a human being, a human, is a being without limitations. You're doing this podcast currently. 10 years from now, you may decide you want to do something completely different. Next week, you may decide you want to do something completely different. You may decide you want to grow your hair out. You may decide you want to get married. There's so much possibility to our being. And we need to be reminded that all of those possibilities and all those ambiguities, and as you said, the word used before was adventure. The potential adventures that come with living life are for us to embrace. Yeah.
I didn't even know I was trying to grow my hair out. I don't know. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
As you know yourself better than I do, what is a perfect question that I could ask you?
Perfect question. That's a good question. Perfect question. I don't have a perfect question that comes to mind. I do have, the reason being is that I don't consider myself as someone who has the answers. I like to explore topics and subjects. So even today, like, this is an interview by definition, but I wouldn't position myself as how do I frame this? Yeah, I don't position myself as someone who has the answers or that all of my thoughts are definitively right or should be accepted. So I think there's fluidity. I embrace fluidity of thought and fluidity of um, building concepts. So I don't have a perfect question, but I do have topics that I enjoy speaking to. Those topics being mental health, philosophy in relation to spirituality, and relationships, not specifically in the context of romance, but just how people interact with each other and build connections with each other.
Mhm.
I probably made your question more complex than I
No,
needed
it's
to,
okay.
but I don't have a perfect question off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. I do also enjoy philosophy, as you can probably already tell by some of maybe the questions that I've asked you, or
For sure.
just the exploration of self. Philosophy is definitely probably number one for me. Something that I do enjoy, being in philosophical thought, and I think to some degree we are all philosophers in some way. If you are able to have a conscious brain and think, then you by definition are, in my regard, a philosopher.
Right.
That's an interesting question. Just because I think that sometimes we either ask ourselves some questions or we don't ask ourselves some questions, and I wanted to relay that question to you.
I appreciate that. That's one of those ones I gotta think about.
Yeah, of course. Sure. What do you think? I saw this on a podcast, and Chris Williamson asked a gentleman, "What do you wish women knew about men?" And I thought it was a perfect question because I think that there are, perfect, but I think it was a very well thought question because I think that there are some misconceptions about men.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes the perspective or perception of men is not always received in the best way possible.
Right.
What do you wish that women knew about men?
That's a good question. I was asked that very recently as well, and it was just framed a little differently. And it's interesting that I was asked that maybe, I think this is the third time I was asked that this week, something along those lines. And I pay attention to repetition and synchronicity. And I think that question it seems to be pertinent because it's top of mind in different spaces that I'm in. So what do I wish women knew about men? I believe it would be healthier for relationships between women and men, especially in the romantic context, if weakness was viewed more objectively. And so weakness, whether it's emotional or physical or financial, I think there are a lot of areas that weakness can occur in. But women and men typically view weakness from a negative lens and view it with judgment. And I believe if weakness were viewed objectively between people, not even out beyond the context of how women view men, I think if people viewed weakness objectively, that would create space for healthier and more productive relationships. And so I view weakness in the context of athleticism. So I used to coach basketball in the beginning of my teaching career. And if you have a player who's a great shooter, but is not a great defender, you wouldn't just cut him from the team. You would want to develop that area of weakness. It's not a negative. It doesn't make me devalue the player or ignore his contributions on the offensive side. It just means that his defensive skills need to be further developed. In the relationship context, what I observe in clients I work with and people I talk to even outside of a work context is that when weaknesses are observed, especially in the social emotional realm, there's judgment associated with it, sometimes dismissal of a person because of their weaknesses. And again, I think when weakness is considered objectively, I think it allows for more potential to a connection. I also understand boundaries and standards, and not everyone is going to embrace every level of weakness. So people obviously should have the right to what they want to tolerate or not. But I do think, excuse me, in the context specifically to your question of how women view men, I think more objectivity in that view could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why a lot of men, as it is close to the end of Men's Mental Health Month, I think that's why a lot of men do end up in suicide. The suicide rates are so high is because the bid for emotional connection in that way, or seen as a man wants to tell something to his girlfriend,
Right.
or his significant other that, hey, I'm feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's often that bid is never accepted and it's rejected.
I agree. I don't want to cut your train of thought.
Yeah, of course. No, continue.
I was just going to build on that thought to add that I think in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, men also do it to ourselves.
True.
We also view weakness as a negative trait. And so, of course, the mental health stigma, when men are going through mental health challenges, we tend to view it as a weakness of character as opposed to an area of growth. So if you struggle to communicate, or even the example you gave earlier of in the context of developing friendships or feeling like you should be working when you're not, there's a judgment that comes with that. It may not be the harshest. I think how harsh it is depends on the person and what they tell themselves. But we often silence ourselves. And how can your partner know to operate differently if you're silencing yourself, if you're viewing yourself from a negative lens? And so it's not to take away accountability in partnerships, but I think there's a compounded dynamic here. There's an internal one with how men view and treat themselves, and how women or their partners view and treat us as well.
I do agree. I think a lot of it is, like you said, on ourselves. We kind of shoot ourselves in our own foot by not offering that bid for a connection.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of men struggle with is just even simply like telling your friends or your brothers or your bros that you appreciate them and love them. And I think if we can go so far as extend there, I think it could probably show a better in our relationships and our personal relationships, because once we get rid of the masculine stigma of, oh, I can't tell a friend of mine that I love them or that I care for them or I'm thinking about them.
Right.
It's kind of like, whoa, buddy. Like, it's seen as feminine, or it's seen as like, what's going on? Are you okay?
Right.
And instead of just offering that bid for connection or that bid for just telling somebody that you care about them, because you don't know if it'll be your last day. That's something that I often do with my closest friends is, maybe I could tell them more that I love them and that I care about them.
Right.
But whenever I do, I guess they know that I'm more of the emotional one. But
Mm.
I also understand that this life could be gone in an instant. And
Right.
I've, known people that have died at 22, 23 years old. And I guess the older you get, the more you realize that tomorrow life could be completely gone.
100%. And I like you naming that as well when it comes to how we express affection to our friends. Um, because you're absolutely right. I think it reinforces the stigmas and the limitations that we place on our friendships and the potential of them. And that's something I'm guilty of. I remember I remember a couple of friends. I was thinking of one friend, but this actually happened a couple of times where I had to analyze myself even. And this was not that long ago, maybe a couple years ago or so. This wasn't like this wasn't too long ago, but I remember friends, a couple of friends telling me that they loved me when we would part ways. And instead of saying I love you too, I said likewise
Mm.
or much love or something along that. It wasn't I love you. It was like some other phrase that was just reflecting what they expressed, but in a less direct way. And I had to question myself, like, why was that? Why did I feel uncomfortable saying that back? Because I love them, right? These are friends that I trust and that I've known for a long time and that I have good relationships with. There's no animosity or any kind of, I've never questioned the friendship or the value of it or that connection. But yeah, I had to even sit with myself and be like, why was that so hard for me to say that?
What was the answer that you came to?
What you were saying, just being, not wanting to seem weak,
Mm.
not wanting to, not wanting to feel vulnerable in the moment. And I know exactly where it comes from. And that's from experiencing um, trauma may be too large of a word for the experience, but experiencing friendships that we talked about reciprocation earlier, experiencing friendships where the love wasn't reciprocated or where I experienced betrayal or friends who didn't have the best interests or will towards me and being blindsided by it. And so the shield or the wall came up after that of I can trust my friends or I can express affection to my friends, but only to a certain extent because you just never know.
Mm.
So it's definitely tied to a fear of being vulnerable, but that was something that I caught within myself. As you said, that's what came up for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is always the thing because my friends look at me and obviously I've grown like not only like emotionally or spiritually but like also
Mm.
physically, so it's like
Yeah.
the guy who lifts like heavy weights, it's like, oh, he's
Mm.
gonna be the softest guy or whatever.
Yeah.
So there also comes that type of stigma as well.
Sure.
I don't want to take too much more of your time, so I guess the last question I have for you
Mm.
is, if today was, God forbid, your last day,
Yeah.
what would the last message to the world be?
Mm. That's a good question. My if today were my last day, my last message to the world would be to, it's multi-layered actually. My last message to the world would be to develop a relationship with your creator, whoever you believe that to be, again, I'm not pious by any means or religious, so I wouldn't push anyone towards any religion. But I think having a relationship with your creator answers more questions for you in relation to purpose, in relation to how to navigate relationships, and how to develop yourself and just navigate in your life. Another layer of this message would be that you have value that's greater than anything external. What that value is or what it's based on is not for me to tell you. That's a personal assessment or metric, but it's there. No matter what your situation is, if you're breathing, you have purpose. Trust that. Even if you don't know why you're breathing, just trust it. And I think the last layer would be look out for anyone with the last name Messeroux. I don't say my son's I don't say my son's name publicly, and I don't show his face for multiple reasons. But anyone you may come across with the last name Messeroux, trust that they are blessed and value the interactions that you have with them. There's not many people named Messeroux on this planet. So if you do come across people with that last name, definitely build with them. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. To anybody that has made it this far, where can they find you?
Social media is probably the easiest. I feel like we said so much about social media in like maybe a negative light, but again, it's a tool. So Jean the Human, that's JEAN, the THE. Human is spelled HUEMAN. Yeah, my page has all my links on it, and I'm also on LinkedIn too. But I would say social media is probably the easiest, like Instagram. Yeah.
Jean, thank you for spending 2 hours plus of your time, and I know that you have a
Thank you.
Family to be with, and you chose to be here on a Sunday evening.
Yeah, and also pleasure, man. This is a edifying conversation. As we had this talk, I'm also reflecting at the same time. So it's definitely worth the time, and I appreciate you building this platform and inviting me to it. And I commend the work that you're doing and the thoughts and ideas that you're putting out there. And I look forward to seeing it grow.
Thank you.
I look forward to when it's the #1 podcast in the world, I can look back and say, hey, I was on that back in 2025, and I can point my kid to, tap into this. So yeah, it's an honor to be here, man. I'm grateful.
This won't be our last conversation. I can tell you that. We could have kept going, but I also wanted to be mindful of your time. So this definitely will not be the last time.
Understood. And whatever I could support or align with that you're doing, just feel free. I mean, you got my contact, so yeah, just feel free.
Jean, thank you again.
Thank you, man.